What is up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHillIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. He's Andrew Jones, sitting across the Smith Center court right in front of me. And AJ, we are obviously in the Smith Center following Carolina's 82-69 loss to second-ranked Duke. A truly kind of tale of two halves games in one way when you look at just how the second half played out, which we're going to start with here in a second. But AJ, real quickly, just want to go through the milestones we're trying to hit. We actually just got over 19,000 subscribers on YouTube, so we are slowly moving on up. We're trying to hit 20K on YouTube, though. Trying to hit 12,000 followers on Facebook and 40,000 on Twitter. Links to the description are below. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the notification bell too right now, and get involved in the comments throughout the show because we want to hear from you guys. Get your thoughts about the games, thoughts about what Carolina has to do moving forward to potentially get in the NCAA tournament, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in this show as well. So definitely get involved in the comments. But AJ, I mean, I'm going to mute you for a second because we got a little bit of background noise going on because we got people cleaning up and everything. So just bear with me for a second. But I think it's funny because we're not going to start with the first half in this show, which I think feels like we kind of typically do in a lot of these. We're going to start with the second half. We're going to start with a specific instance that kind of changed the tide of this game a little bit. And I'm going to kind of run people through it here. And I'm sure a lot of people who watch it will remember this sequence because it really was the game changer in a lot of ways. Carolina up by 4 at the 14:23 mark. RJ Davis comes out along with Vin Allen Lubin. By the time RJ returned, something that Hubert actually talked about in his press conference, I believe you asked him about it. That was around the 11:27 mark. Duke was up by 2. RJ never scored a point again after having 15 in the second half and 5 quick points to start, or excuse me, 15 in the first half, 5 quick points to start the second half, man. So we were talking about it because we were trying to figure out, like, was RJ, there was rumors that he cramped up, and why did they take him out? And then I know we talked to RJ afterwards. He said he was cramping. Hubert Davis didn't really acknowledge that necessarily in his postgame press conference, even though you asked him and prefaced RJ saying he was cramping. So just one of those instances where I don't know if he's cramping for real, which RJ said he was, and there's nothing you can really do about it. But watching that game, it was just so evident that the tides flip right there because Carolina's offense got stagnant. And when RJ came back in, he was just getting clamped up by Duke. So that feels like that was the turning point in the game. Cramp or not, Carolina just could never quite recover from RJ coming out.
If anybody ever questions the importance of RJ Davis to his team, just look at that sequence. Yeah. Because we didn't know he was cramping. There were no appearances of it from our vantage point. And he came out and like, what the hell's he coming out for right now? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, he's dominating the game. It was his game, and everyone else was along for the ride. He was doing Miami Wake Forest stuff from a year ago. That's what he was doing. And he came out, and the first possession, they were rudderless. Elliot Cadeau came in for him. It was a quick break for Elliot. Usually Elliot sits a little longer in the first half when he comes out for the first time and a half. And Elliot didn't go get the ball when he should have gone to get the ball a couple times. They just looked like they're looking around like, oh my God, where's RJ? Who are we with tonight without RJ? And I don't think there was a tremendous amount of confidence on the floor as soon as the recognition was him is not out here. And they died. I mean, I don't say they died, but like they changed dramatically at that moment. And they changed on both ends of the floor. They changed overall. They kept fighting hard. They kept playing hard. They did some good things. Ian helped them with a fast break drive that was very impressive in that. And that little stint, and I even thought, okay, that's a tiny little pebble they moved forward, but they needed to move a pebble forward before they get RJ back in there and he can resume doing RJ things. He never did resume doing RJ things. So had he gone back in and continued doing what he was doing, and by the way, when he went out or when he hit his last shot of the game, his last basket was with 7:43 left.
Yeah.
At that moment, he had scored 17 points in 8.5 minutes of game time against Duke. And Duke had tried everything in the world on him, doubling. Sometimes a third guy, Malawash on him. And RJ was finding ways to be that guy. He was that guy from last year. And when he came back in, he said no excuses about the cramp. Didn't really bother him. He was 0 for his last 5, but they were completely different. Their mojo had shifted, and Duke started taking control of the game, and Duke's the best team in the country. Duke is the best team in the country. And for all the positive things Carolina did in this game, and you have no room for error in a game like this. You can't leave anything out there. And take RJ coming out and nobody being able to make a play, looking rudderless on offense, I think bled into everything else. And I think Duke closed the game out scoring them 33-13. 32-13. It's 33-13 because Carolina led 56-49.
Yep.
And then it was 82-69. So Duke outscored them 33-13 to close the game. And that was over like the final 13 minutes or whatever it was. So there's a lot of stuff to go around. The players are responsible ultimately. But cramps, I guess, got him out of the game. If it weren't cramps, I would strongly question bringing him out at that time because he owned the game. It was his game, and the other 9 people on the floor merely had to be there. And that was the difference. RJ doesn't have the cramps. If RJ doesn't come out, Carolina keeps its mojo going. Tar Heels may have won this game. I also want to say Shire caught a great timeout early in the second half. After RJ's last bucket, Carolina went up and 56-49, that mark 56-49. Shire called a long timeout, a full timeout, almost like to reset the half. And you can use timeouts. And you can use timeouts to your advantage. I thought it was a smart timeout. And technically, RJ didn't score after that.
Yeah.
But Carolina was different from the moment he came out for the rest of the game. They never, ever, ever looked like the team that went on a 35-13 run up to that point.
Yeah, I was talking to Brian at halftime, funny enough. I'm going to mute you real quick, just cut out some of that background noise again. But I was talking to Brian at halftime. We were in the elevator going down to the bowels of the Smith Center. And I told him, I was like, this just feels and is shaping up to be one of those games where RJ's, he's going to, I think I told him, I was like, he's going to have to give you 30 plus. And I think I tweeted it out with about 10 or 11 minutes to go in the second half because that's the way the game had gone. And that's really the way the first half had gone because not forget, I mean, AJ, Carolina was struggled in the first half at times too. It was an RJ Davis spurred run to end the first half that, got Carolina only behind by 1 after what? They were behind by 15, I think, at one point in the first half, excuse me. So it was him who spurned him. And then, he comes out of the game with a cramp and he never recovers after that. And you're watching this game. And I remember talking to some people behind me on press row and being like, if RJ's just, if his production's going to dry out like this, and credit to Duke for doing what they did against him, it just felt like one of those games where Carolina didn't have a chance, and ultimately AJ they didn't have a chance because Carolina led by 7 points with, I believe, what was it, around 15 minutes left or something, 15:30. I think it was 15:30. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was at the 35. I agree. RJ needed to score in the 30. I figured maybe 30 going in. They needed somebody to rise up and out Duke. What I'm saying is Duke has guys that just make money plays. Caleb Foster gave him great minutes in the second half, and he hadn't been doing much lately. Everybody Duke put in the game made money plays, and they had money sequences. Malik Brown with his screens, with his defending rolls after screens. He hit 2 threes tonight. They all had those segments, and Carolina needed a guy to out-Duke Duke. And there's not a lot on that roster that can measure up to that, to be perfectly honest with you. RJ's a guy who's done it before. And it looked like he was doing it again. And he needed to do it for another 14 minutes. Comes out 14:34, whatever it was. If he does it for another 14 minutes, Carolina maybe wins this game. He didn't. That shows you the difference between Carolina and Duke. There is a massive difference between these two teams. This Duke team, I've covered Duke games in person for 29 years in some capacity. I covered Duke along with Carolina for a long time. I've done probably 300 of their games. I did some of those early 2000s teams a lot. I did 2010. I did 2015. This Duke team, they're not 2001, but they're as good as those other ones.
Oh, yeah.
They're a really good team. And Carolina threw a lot of punches and a lot of good punches in this game. And Carolina showed that they're a better team than they were last time they played. But Duke's just better, man. They got answers galore for everything. They wear you down. They're bigger. They're longer. They're bullies in a good way. in a basketball sense, just better. And Carolina needed RJ to go for 30 or 35 and somebody else to step up. He didn't get any help. The team that's been getting 5 and 6 guys in double figures for the last 3 games didn't have that tonight. And RJ needed some help, and RJ needed to be better than he was, and it didn't work. He was 0 for his last 5, so 4 of those were threes. He missed them. He needed to hit a couple of those, and he didn't.
Yeah, and like I said, I thought Duke's length and athleticism in the second half, once they were able to kind of clamp him down a little bit, was just – it wasn't even that he was getting bad looks. I mean, there were stretches where he just wasn't able to get looks. And, again, that just completely changed the game. You know what I mean?
Jacob, he hit some shots that he hadn't had a long time. It was interesting because someone sitting next to me on press row said, it's kind of apropos that some of those went in because, they gave during timeouts, the rest reviewed film and gave Duke an extra point. They gave him 3-pointers instead of the 2-pointer that was on the floor during the game. And there were a couple of other sequences. I figure, well, maybe RJ hitting a couple of those shots is evening things out, and perhaps so. But I think Carolina gave Duke its best shot tonight. And that 35-13 run shows people, and I guess we're going to talk about that too, but the 35-13 run, that was a big part of RJ doing what he did. He scored 17 in that run. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had 17 points in that run. He was fantastic, and he gave the rest of the team confidence. And that's why when he came out, you could see the confidence just drain from their bodies. Oh, yeah. It's like that scene. It's like that scene in A Bronx Tale when those bikers go to the bar, and they're kind of, you can see they're up to no good. And Sonny's like, okay, go ahead and give him a couple beers, and they start spraying beer on the bartender. And Sonny tells them to leave. They won't. He goes and locks the door, turns and says, now you can't leave. And the way Kojimo, whatever his name is in the movie, says you could see the blood drain from their body in that scene. Those bikers, they knew they had made a grave mistake. Yeah. When RJ went out of the game, you could see that just drain from Carolina, and they never recovered. No. Kojimo, that's his name. See. What a name. I didn't see that reference coming on here, but man, that's what you get here at Tar Illustrated. That's absolutely fantastic. Have you seen that movie?
You, AJ? Yes, it's been a while, but yes.
Brett Freeland's favorite line in any movie. Now you can't leave. It's great. Anyway.
Oh, that is fantastic. But
as Bill Belichick might say, on to the second thing.
Yeah, on to the second thing, and as Bill Belichick would say. But 33-13, I believe it was 33-13. I've been doing some research while you've been talking because I've seen 35-13. I've seen 33-13. We haven't had a chance to go back and look at it.
But from what I've seen, 21.
Okay. And I've seen 33-13 more than I've seen 35-13. Let's put it that way.
It was 36-21, and Carolina led 56-49.
You're so better at math than I am. Okay, we'll go with that. I trust your math a lot more than I trust. Not that it really matters. It's a 2-point difference no matter what. But
I think I tweeted out at one point 35-13, but then I went look back. It was a great run. It was something nobody else has done on Duke this year and won't do on Duke. It won't happen next. Clemson could beat them next weekend in Charlotte, and there's some teams in the NCAA tournament that could beat them. They ain't going on 33-13 or 35-13 runs. This team did, and it showed that they've made progress.
Yeah, I think that's the positive you have to take away from this because, I mean, there's no doubt about it that, it is a better Carolina team at this point. Now, a lot of people are going to sit here and say, well, they won 6 straight, lost to Duke at the end of the year, but they didn't beat anybody, so we were proven right the whole time. Carolina just didn't play anybody, and they never improved, and they really were just beating bad teams. And, again, I think that's just a simplistic way to look at it because I think tonight, again, showed, and there was people in the press room talking about it, too, after the game, funny enough. This isn't just something that we've kind of, been pulling out. And I'm sure there's fans sitting at home, too, kind of like, yeah, you know what? It wasn't nearly as good. It wasn't nearly as bad as it was in Durham, but there have been some improvements that Carolina have shown. Now, the problem with Carolina, this is the last regular season game of the year, and Carolina's going to have to pretty much go to the ACC tournament and win it. We'll talk about that here in a second, AJ, but I do think Carolina has made progress. Unfortunately, I think it might be too little too late, but at the same time, there's no doubt that it's funny. The reason I'm going back and forth in my head right now, AJ, is because Duke beat Carolina by 17 in Durham a month ago. Carolina was by 15 tonight. So you look at the score line, you're like, well, I mean, it improved by 2 points, but there's no doubt about it that if you watch this game, it was a much different game than what we saw in Durham a month ago. And again, I think Carolina deserves some sort of credit for that, although I think there are going to be a lot of fans out there that might not want to give them that, if that makes sense.
I'll say it this way. Carolina's played 6 games this year against teams that would be high seeds, very high seeds in the NCAA tournament. Auburn, Alabama, Florida, Clemson, and Duke twice. Okay, Florida, they had a chance. Florida closed them out. In the Auburn game, did you ever think Carolina had a chance to win that game? No. When Alabama came in here 5 minutes in, did you think Carolina had a chance to win that game?
No.
When Carolina went to Durham, did you ever think Carolina had a chance to win that game? It was over 10 minutes in. When Carolina went to Clemson, did you think they had a chance in that game? No. Clemson had a massive run, cut their heads off. Tonight, in the second half, every person in this building was thinking, my God, they might actually do it. And it took Duke a while to put them away, because even as poorly as Carolina was playing during that stretch, can't remember who it was, Seth or somebody hit a bucket, or maybe Jay Witt hit a three, and it's like 68.
I think it was Jay Witt.
Hit a three, and it's 68-64, and you're like, you know what? They have this is great back here. You hear it? It's Jay Wood hit a three, and I think it was 68-64, and you're like, they have withstood a lot of stuff tonight. They withstood Duke going on that early run in the first half that we questioned when we did our show the other day. How do they respond to it? They responded. They didn't respond 5 weeks ago. And then Duke's doing it again, and RJ wasn't there, and they became rudderless and everything. And a shot goes in, and it's a 4-point game. And everybody still hoped. People were still hoping up to the final TV timeout that there was a chance that this team could go on a spurt, because they've shown that they can spurt. And they did it tonight against a very, very good team. So that right there is all the evidence you need. There wasn't a moment in any of those other games where Carolina fans had any hope. None. Zero. Except Florida. And Florida dominated down the stretch, closing them out. So, and Duke did here tonight, but they've made a lot of progress. This is fantastic, Sam. They've made a lot of progress, and I think that people need to at least accept that. It doesn't mean that they're a really good team. It doesn't even mean that they're a good team. It means at times they can be a good team, and they've gotten to that point now. I don't think going into Clemson or after the Clemson game, they were a good team at times. I think they would have snippets, and they were barely beating crap teams. So they're much better than they were, but I'm afraid it's not good enough given the resume. And it certainly wasn't good tonight against the best team in the country that had their best player in foul trouble and didn't do a whole lot other than one stretch in the second half. Proctor wasn't exactly on fire for a while. Knipple went 20 game minutes without scoring, and yet Duke still cruises to close this thing out. Because
Cooper Flagg. I mean, Duke weirdly played better when Cooper Flagg was out with foul trouble in the first half, and I think that just shows how good they are. You know what I mean?
For a while. Ultimately, Carolina actually outscored them 26-22 when he was on the bench in foul trouble. For a while, Duke extended the lead big time. They went up 36-21 with him on the bench for a long time. And then Carolina started chipping away at it, and they missed him because there was a stretch there where Duke kind of looked like, hey, where's Cooper? We've gone long enough without Cooper, and Shire put him in, and he picks up his third foul. And then Carolina closes the first half 10-2 after Flagg picked up his third foul. So they need him moving forward. This isn't a Duke podcast, but they do. But credit Carolina for getting him to the bench. That was a winning recipe. Get him in foul trouble. Knipple goes 20 minutes without scoring. That was another part of the winning recipe. But the game flipped when RJ went out, and that's that.
Yeah, that's that. I'm going to mute you again for extremely obvious reasons as to why I would do that. But let's talk about what this means real quick. But side note, guys, when I tell you there is 4 cleaners here, one of them just happens to be behind AJ's. That's what you get here at 3 Things, baby. That's what you get here, and this is what you tune in for right here. This is as raw as it gets over here at TarHeelIllustrated.com. But AJ, let's talk about what this means. We're going to do a separate drop, kind of talking a little bit more about the team and where fans are at, maybe where they should be at with this team right now. But we talked about it in the show this week. You know, Carolina's put itself in a position now where, you know, even going into this game, they needed to beat Duke and they needed to go to the ACC tournament to safely be in and win 2 games minimum. Now Carolina loses to Duke. They're 1-11 in quad 1 games to end the season. The recipe for success now for North Carolina is officially survive an advanced season at Chapel Hill, because another loss this season, it's over for the Tar Heels. They've got to go to Charlotte and win the whole thing, in my opinion. I think you'll agree with that as well, and I think most fans out there will agree with that too. It's not ideal for this Carolina team, but unfortunately that's where they find themselves at right now. So, yeah, man, fans are obviously going to be frustrated with how this season ultimately played out because, again, Carolina had 12 different opportunities, AJ, to win Q1 games. They only won one of them. That in itself is not good enough. And again, when you look at that resume alone, that for me is what's circled. I know Carolina only has one Q3 loss. I know they had a really good record against Q2. I know they've won 6 games in a row before this Duke game, and they're kind of hot or hotter than they obviously were early in the season right now. I was going to say only lost by 3 at Kansas or 2 by Kansas, but Kansas is atrocious now. So the resume speaks for itself. And again, it's that Q1 box right there that's just, can I say stinky? Because it's 1-11 is not very good, is it, AJ? I hate to be cruel, but
1-11
is not very good.
1-11 is the Webster's Dictionary definition of stinky. So I use your word.
In the tournament, man.
I talked to Bryant one night about banning you from using that word. But what the hell? Keep using it. I think what I want to focus on for a minute, and I'll hit on that in a second, but kind of where is this team right now? 32 games. Who are they? What are they? Before they go to Charlotte, what kind of group exhales and then reconvenes Monday to get ready for Charlotte? I think it's a club that is going to feel pretty good that they made tonight's game matter, because after Clemson, there was no way anybody thought tonight's game would be anything more than pride. And they did enough that game day was here. I mean, had they gone 3-3 in the last 6, game day would have been in Tuscaloosa or in Auburn, which is where they should have been, by the way. So they made tonight's game matter. They gave people reason to start hoping again. And I know that this is North Carolina basketball, and in February and early March, giving your fans a reason to hope when it didn't before is not the standard. And it's not what North Carolina fans should have to go through. But this is their season, 20-12. I don't think anybody figured 20-12 with this group, 13-7 in a crappy ACC. I think that the broad view is this team underachieved. I think the broad view is that it took Hubert way too long to figure out what worked. I think the broad view is this team made its bed and now it must lie in it. Must lay in it. Because you make a layup against Michigan State and Hawaii, doesn't go to overtime, you get that game on your resume. You figure out a way to make a stop in Lawrence, Kansas, and you steal one, which turns out to be against not a great team. You don't allow 4 offensive rebounds for second chance points to Florida in Charlotte in the last 3 minutes of the game. You don't get outscored 14-2 in the last 3 minutes in Louisville and lose. You don't pull a no-show in Wilt in Durham, at least be competitive. You don't pull a no-show in Wilt in Littlejohn, at least be competitive. The reality is this team has played, 6, 4, 6? I think I just laid it out there. They're quad 1 games. Right now, Wake is still a quad 1 loss. They're not any good. I mean, they're okay. They're going to be a 4 seed. That's how bad the ACC is.
No.
Pitt has completely fallen off the map and started falling before Carolina went up there and lost. And then Carolina barely won here by a point. You know what I mean? There are games where they created this for themselves. So the whole of the picture is this was an underachieving season, and it's a disappointing season. It's a season that should be unacceptable for any coach in Carolina basketball, especially when 2 years ago they didn't make the tournament. And 2 years ago's team, I think, is better than this one. Maybe not in the last couple of weeks, but better. And they were 1-9. They were 20-13. Didn't get in. They shouldn't have gotten in. So they are who they are. They proved in the end that they were good enough to go on runs and punk some bad teams. So they weren't that earlier. If they would have been that team a month and a half earlier, we wouldn't be having this conversation about NCAA viability, to be honest with you. So it begins at the top and trickles down, and now they're in this situation. So I think they have to win the ACC tournament because they're going to play, Pitt or Notre Dame on Wednesday? They need wins. They need to stack wins and then get Wake on Thursday. And Wake finally played well today. Wake has been playing terribly. but they lost to Wake, and Wake was up 11 with a minute left in that game. It wasn't really a 1-point game. Have fun trying to guard Hunter Salas. That's going to be a tough game for this team. And if they happen to win that, their next quad one opportunity would be Duke Friday night in Charlotte. I don't want to play Duke again. I don't think this fan base wants anything to do with Duke again, because I think that it would be an ugly, ugly scene. So this club has to win the ACC tournament to get in, and I do not see that happening right now. And because of that, I would be stunned if they make the NCAA tournament, and they have themselves to blame if they don't. This, based on roster and talent, as we saw lately, that they weren't as small as people thought. They played bigger because the approach was right. So it, to me, would be a failure to not make the NCAA tournament with this roster.
Yeah, I agree. I want to ask you something just to play devil's advocate. I don't necessarily believe this, and this is a deeper discussion for another podcast. Let's just hit on it real quick. I know there's a lot of fans out there that don't necessarily agree that the team underachieved. I think there's a lot of fans out there. I'm going to mute you for a second because of background noise. That think Carolina was doomed to fail from the beginning in a lot of ways. Because AJ, you remember the chatter, and we talked about it earlier in the year, and we as we always do, we said, let's see how this plays out. And in hindsight, it didn't play out great, despite, I think, Vin Allen-Lubin in the season very strongly. I think if he comes back, will be a really good player for North Carolina next year. But a lot of people in the beginning of the year said Carolina failed in the portal and it didn't get a dominant enough big, and that's what's going to hold this team back. I don't necessarily believe that. And I think it's a little bit of both. I actually think it's a little bit of both, where I think this team did underachieve with the roster it had, but I also think in the offseason, this team also failed too with how they built the roster. And again, hindsight's 2020, but these are questions we've had going back to before the season even started. So what do you make of that? Because I think there's people in both camps, and I also think there's people more so like me who kind of maybe view it a little bit of both at the same time.
Well, they got 2 first-round NBA picks, and they've got last year's ACC Player of the Year, who's the 3rd all-time leading scorer in ACC history, who was that guy for a while tonight. And they've got a veteran like Jalen Withers, who's 24 years old and been a part of college basketball for 6 years, a very solid player in Van Allen. People finally saw what we saw a long time ago. This team should have been playing like that a long time ago. And finally, Hubert figured out that Jay Wash is a distant reserve big. So, and Seth Trimble was very good off the bench and very good as a starter. He's a good player. He had a better year than anybody expected. Much better year than anybody expected. So I think this team, the team that we saw the last 7 games, never should have lost away. Never should have lost at Pitt. All right. Never, quite frankly, they should have beaten Michigan State. Those 3 alone, if they're 23-9, and they're 14-6 or 15-5 in the ACC, they're a lock, and we're not even talking about Dayton. I mean, this club right now, they could win the ACC tournament, may still end up in Dayton. Now, they may get a lot of help because the bubble's not very good, and a lot of teams on the bubble lost last night. Boise lost last night at home, double figures. So a couple teams lost today. That might help them out. But I ran that piece last week, and I'm going to run it again maybe Sunday or Monday. You look at the resumes of the teams that have not gotten in the last 3 years, the power conference teams with 3 or more quad 1 wins. There's a ton of them. This club's got 1. They've had 12 opportunities to prove themselves. They haven't done it. And quite frankly, this club, its roster should not lose to Clemson by 20 and down 26. It never should have been down 32 to Duke with 9.5 minutes left in Durham. It never should have been rolled. It never should have pulled a complete disappearing act against Alabama on this floor. Those are really good teams, but the talent here, there's a lot of guys on this roster every team in America would pick and take and say, okay, let's take this guy right now. We can win a title. He's a missing piece. The roster's better than a lot of people think. Yeah, there are some deficiencies, no doubt about it. And I think the way they went about things a lot this year exposed deficiencies more than they should have. I think the way they went about things the last few weeks minimized the deficiencies because they approached the game the right way. And yeah, I guess a lot of that falls on the head coach. I think it took Hubert a long time to figure out how to play this team. And that's his job. He gets paid very well to do it. He accepts the head coaching job at North Carolina. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to be in bubble conversations in March? The reality is that since 2019, last year is the only time North Carolina knew it was a lock at the end of February to get in the NCAA tournament. The only time. Carolina fans know what the hell the quad stuff is better than most fan bases because they're gnawing on it every year.
I'm tired of talking about it, man. I don't like the system to begin with.
I was like, damn, that's the most exasperated I've ever seen you look. But it's true. I'm sick and tired of quad 1 stuff, quad 2 stuff. I'm sick and tired of looking at what the hell Dayton did. It was Ohio State a couple of years ago. This year it's Dayton. This year you're thinking, well, I mean, lately I'm saying, good God, keep losing. That's going to be a quad 2 loss. They're going to fall out of the top 75. Pitt, I guess, has already done that, or I guess not done that, but they're close to doing it. It's still a quad 1 loss, and Pitt's a train wreck. So,
yeah, I think
they made their bed. They have to lay in it.
No, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think that was a perfect kind of summation of what I think fans should feel. I'm not trying to tell people what they should feel. Get involved in the comments, but I agree. I think it's a little bit of both. A team that underachieved, a team that's approach wasn't right for a big portion of the season, and also a team that, at the end of the day, probably if they could go back, maybe, and again, hindsight's 2020, so that plays a big factor. But if it could go back, maybe does some things differently in the offseason. But again, that's a big what if at this point, and something we'll never know. So, AJ, I'm in the pod with this. I'm going to end with some stats from this game in particular, because we just spent the last 5-10 minutes talking about, moving forward. So I'll end it with this, and to make my final point of this one, run through some stats. Carolina shot 39% from the floor, 33% from three. Only 2 Carolina players finished in double figures. Just 5 second-half points for R.J. Davis. He didn't score a point in the final 17-43. Just 7 fast break points for Carolina. 4 Duke players finished with 15+, and Duke had a 40-28 points in the paint advantage and a 39-26 rebound advantage. AJ,
dude, Carolina had like a 24-18 points in the paint advantage at one point.
I know.
I haven't seen that stat. They got wrecked in the last 12 minutes. They just got wrecked. They got wrecked by a great team. So,
Yeah.
Wow.
And the reason I list those stats is because, AJ, if someone would have came up to me and you before the game and, showed us this crystal ball in this box score from the future, and you saw that, you'd be like, oh, yeah, Carolina loses by double digits, and that's exactly what happened. So, yeah, unfortunate night for North Carolina, a game that in the first half looked like it could have gone a different direction. Even to start the second half looked like it might have been headed in a very different direction when Carolina went up 7. But ultimately, man, it was not enough. 82-69 loss for the Tar Heels. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones, the final regular season edition of our Three Things Post-Game podcast. We will obviously be back for next week's ACC tournament. We're going to record a quick drop out of this and expect either some kind of basketball podcast or basketball show before the ACC tournament as well. So trying to get
do one with David. I'm hoping to do one with David.
It's a call out to you, David.
It's hard arranging stuff with David, so because he's so busy with a lot of things. But I'm hoping to do one with him Sunday.
If not, me and AJ will get on something early in the week and put a little basketball show out or something like that, because I think it is worth previewing the tournament a little bit. So, again, we appreciate you guys. Get involved in the comments. Make sure you subscribe. Hit that like button. Head over to Twitter and Facebook as well and like us so we can get those milestones. And we'll be giving out some free THI when we do. Appreciate you guys as always. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks.